Airline steward kicks an old person of color 7 minutes after the fact realize she claims the aircraft in this charming video. We dive into a stunning episode that occurred on board a flight, uncovering startling exciting bends in the road what started as a standard excursion immediately swelled into a showdown, including an airline steward and an older person of color. The circumstance veered off in a strange direction, leaving everybody on board shocked. We'd very much want to hear, assuming that you're amped up for this story, assuming you lived it up watching the video. Feel free to squeeze one in. The event that is not the case, simply press 0. Your criticism genuinely persuades me to gather really endearing and huge stories. The morning daylight filled the clamoring air terminal as Miss Hazel, an exquisite old person of color in her late 70s, stood calmly in line to get onto a flight she had been anticipating for quite a long time, wearing a straightforward yet honorable outfit, a Naval Force blue dress, dark sweatshirt, and her #1 pearl neckband. She exuded a peaceful certainty that accompanied age and shrewdness. Her delicate dark twists were conveniently tucked under a little cap, and her badly crumpled hands grasped a cowhide satchel, a loved gift from her late spouse. This excursion was unique, her first time passing quickly in quite a while, and it denoted her excursion to visit her extraordinary grandkids for the absolute first time. Miss Hazel's expectation was blended in with anxious fervor. Flying wasn't something she frequently did. Truth be told, this was her first experience on an extravagance carrier. Her child, who demanded booking the ticket, however, needed to ensure her process was basically as agreeable as conceivable. He had told her mother, "You merit the best," and Hazel was reluctant at first. She ultimately acknowledged his liberality, thankful for the opportunity to make the excursion without the pressure of lengthy drives or transport rides. As the boarding system started, Hazel saw she was encircled by a horde of sharp-looking travelers, a considerable lot of whom looked at her with caused a commotion. She was no more bizarre to these looks, the implicit judgment, the unpretentious articulation of objection, yet she had learned quite a while in the past to hold her head high and push ahead. The weak murmurs behind her didn't be ignored, however. Hazel zeroed in on the ticket in her grasp, column 2A. She grinned to herself, wondering about how close she would be to the front of the plane while her loading up bunch was called. Hazel ventured forward, her consistent speed a difference to the hurried developments of the travelers around her. As she drew nearer the airline steward at the door, she gave over her ticket with a comforting grin. The chaperone checked it, delayed for a second, then constrained a considerate yet stressed smile. "Partake in your flight, ma'am," she said, however her tone needed veritable warmth. Hazel dismissed it and continued down the fly scaffold, her fervor building with each step. The airplane glimmered under the lights, its smooth inside flaunting rich seats and cleaned completes. Hazel wondered about the extravagance, feeling a blend of appreciation and stunningness. She had buckled down as long as she can remember, frequently putting others' needs before her own. At this point, interestingly, she was permitting herself to enjoy a little piece of solace as she contacted her doled-out seat 2A. Hazel stopped to respect the open lodge. The seat by the window was welcoming, and she painstakingly put her tote on the floor. However, before she could lift her unobtrusive carry-on into the above compartment, a sharp voice intruded on her viewpoints. "Excuse me, ma'am," said Karen, the lead airline steward, her tone cut and legitimate. Hazel went to see a tall lady in her late 30s, dressed perfectly in the carrier's signature uniform. Karen's demeanor was difficult to peruse, proficient however far off with a sprinkle of bothering. "Is this your seat?" Karen inquired, looking at Hazel as though she didn't have a place there. "Yes, it is," Hazel answered obligingly, holding up her ticket. Karen inclined in to review it, her eyes limiting somewhat before she gestured. "Fine," she said tersely, "if it's not too much trouble. Put away your sack rapidly so we can keep the boarding system moving." Hazel went after the storage space, however her developments were more slow than those of the more youthful travelers around her. Hands shuddered somewhat, not from shortcoming but rather from the apprehensive energy of being in another climate. Karen folded her arms and moaned discernibly, drawing the consideration of close-by travelers. "Do you need assistance?" Karen asked, however her tone clarified that offering help was the last thing she needed to do before Hazel could answer. A man situated close by stood up and tenderly took the sack from her hands. "I have this, ma'am," he said with a kind grin, easily setting it in the compartment. Hazel said thanks to him heartily, her grin certifiable. However, Karen's demeanor soured. "We should not hold up the line," Karen said, her voice conveying an edge as she ventured back. As Hazel subsided into her seat, she saw the inconspicuous looks from different travelers. Some were interested, others uninterested, yet a couple appeared Apparently awkward with her presence, Hazel kept her look forward, her hands laying smoothly on her lap. She had learned sometime in the past not to let others' suppositions characterize her feeling of worth. Karen, anyway, appeared not entirely set in stone to cause her to feel awkward as she strolled all over the path, her eyes every so often dashed toward Hazel, her appearance confused however distant from inviting. Hazel attempted to zero in on the delight that looked for her toward the finish of this excursion, the embraces of her extraordinary grandkids, the sound of their giggling, the tales she would enlighten them concerning her life. However, the cavalier mentalities and objecting gazes from Karen and a portion of the travelers burdened her. Hazel had confronted bias oftentimes previously, yet each case conveyed its own sting. Much to anyone's dismay, this peaceful old lady had a strength that far outperformed their suspicions. Unbeknownst to everybody on board, Ms. Hazel's presence on this flight would before long set off a chain of occasions that would change the carrier perpetually. The flight participation hectically ready for departure, yet Karen's center appeared to be fixed around Ms. Hazel from the second the old lady ventured onto the plane. Karen's attitude toward her had been cold and contemptuous. It wasn't simply her clasp tone or the manner in which she kept away from eye-to-eye connection, it was the demeanor of prevalence Karen conveyed. Like Hazel was a bother in her generally precise world. As travelers subsided into their seats, Hazel delicately squeezed the airline steward call button. She had seen that her safety belt didn't appear to secure appropriately and needed to guarantee she was adhering to the well-being guidelines. Karen moved toward her heels, clicking forcefully against the path floor, and halted unexpectedly before Hazel's seat. "Is it now?" Karen asked her, voice touched with disturbance. Hazel, keeping up with her quiet attitude, grinned sympathetic. "I accept my safety belt is stuck. Would you see any problems with aiding me?" Karen murmured, discernibly boisterous enough so that close-by travelers might hear. She inclined and played with the seat belt for under a second and afterward said, "Nothing bad can really be said about it. You simply have to pull harder." Hazel gestured considerately. "Thank you, dear," she said, changing the belt herself. Karen turned forcefully on her heel and left, murmuring faintly, "Unique demands currently. This will be a long flight." A couple of moments later, Hazel acknowledged she had neglected to take her prescription before the flight and required some water. She delayed the slightest bit, mindful that Karen didn't appear to be especially congenial. However, her well-being was a higher priority than a potential showdown. Hazel squeezed the call button once more and Karen brought this back, time with a not-so-subtle articulation of disturbance. "Yes," Karen asked, crossing her arms. "I am sorry for disturbing you. However, may I have a little cup of water to take?" "My medication?" Hazel asked amiably. Karen let out one more overstated moan. "We're not as yet even in the air, ma'am. Water administration will begin whenever we've reached cruising elevation. You'll need to pause." Hazel attempted to make sense of "It's only for my medication, dear. I won't annoy you once more." Karen feigned exacerbation. "Fine," she expressed, vanishing into the kitchen. When she returned, she basically hammered the little plastic cup of water onto Hazel's tray-table without a word. The travelers close by traded looks, some shaking their heads in dissatisfaction. However, Hazel stayed creative. She said thanks to Karen, delicately took her medicine and attempted to subside into her seat. However, the strain all around was unquestionable. Minutes after the fact, Karen got back to Hazel's room, this time joined by a partner. She remained over Hazel with a demeanor of power, her arms crossed. "Excuse me, ma'am," Karen said noisily, drawing the consideration of neighboring travelers. "Are you certain you're in the right seat? This segment is held for premium travelers." Hazel gazed upward, confounded yet quiet. "Yes, I'm in the right seat. My ticket says 2A." She held up her ticket so that Karen might be able to see. Karen grabbed the ticket from Hazel's hand and analyzed it intently. Her lips tightened. After a second, she gave it back and said, "Well, it seems as though you're in the right seat. However, next time, if it's not too much trouble, make sure you're boarding in the right gathering." Following the methodology, Hazel flickered, uncertain why a significant Karen wanted to address her. "I boarded with my allocated bunch," she said delicately. Karen didn't answer, rather she gone to her associate and mumbled something softly prior to leaving. Hazel heard scraps of her words. "Doesn't have a place," pumping the brakes, and her heart sank. She had experienced bias oftentimes previously, yet it never got more straightforward. The straw that broke the camel's back yet again came when Karen returned, this time tending to Hazel like she were a youngster. Ma'am, you will have to hold your tote under the seat before you consistently, she said. Hazel, who had previously positioned her pack safely under the seat, gazed toward Karen in disarray. It's as of now under the seat, dear Hazel, said Karen, looked down acknowledging she was off base. However, all things considered of letting it out, she said, well, ensure it stays there, I'll check. The travelers around Hazel started to murmur among themselves, plainly seeing Karen's conduct. A young lady situated across the path hung over and said unobtrusively, don't care about her, ma'am, she's been like this since we boarded. You're doing nothing out of sorts. Hazel gave the young lady a thankful grin, yet couldn't resist the urge to feel the heaviness of Karen's antagonism. It was obvious to her and to everybody watching that Karen had singled her out, treating her with a degree of lack of respect that was both superfluous and harmful. As the plane ready for departure, Hazel shut her eyes and took a full breath. Decided not to allow Karen's way of behaving to demolish her excursion, she helped herself to remember the reason for this outing: to see her extraordinary grandkids. They were her bliss, her pride, and they merited getting through a little uneasiness for. Yet Hazel had no clue about that. This wasn't the finish of Karen's conduct, it was just the start. As the plane rose out of sight, Miss Hazel attempted to submerge herself in the view outside. Inside her window, the cushioned mists beneath and the tremendous spread of blue above were stunning. She helped herself to remember the delight looking for her toward the finish of this excursion, the minuscule hands of her extraordinary grandkids connecting with embrace her, their invigorated gab consuming the space. Yet even the excellence of the sky couldn't totally occupy her from the pressure waiting in the lodge. Karen, the lead airline steward, got out and about with the drink truck. Travelers in front of Hazel were served quickly, their solicitations met with proficient, assuming that to some degree cursory productivity. Hazel saw the comforting grins Karen proposed to others, her polite thank you for flying with us, and the manner in which she guaranteed travelers felt when to. However, as Karen drew closer, Hazel's calm, her attitude changed unexpectedly. Excuse me, Hazel said delicately. At the point when Karen contacted her, might I at any point kindly have a little cup of water? Karen halted, her eyes limiting somewhat. Water, she asked, like the solicitations were unbelievable. Yes, dear, somewhat, Hazel answered, her voice considerate yet firm. Karen put one hand on her hip, her articulation solidifying. Ma'am, this isn't a call, she snapped, her voice clearly enough so that the encompassing travelers might be able to hear. The lodge appeared to go calm briefly as heads moved in the direction of Hazel's line. Hazel felt her cheeks become warm, yet she stayed. Made her years out of experience had trained her to deal with such minutes with beauty in any event. While the sting of embarrassment was sharp, Karen's words lingered palpably like a reverberation. A couple of travelers traded stunned looks while others murmured among themselves. A moderately aged man in the line behind Hazel mumbled it was inappropriate, faintly boisterous enough so that Hazel might be able to hear. Hazel gazed toward Karen, her kind eyes touched with pity. I'm grieved in the event that my solicitation bothered you, she said delicately. I simply have to remain hydrated for my well-being. Karen didn't answer promptly, rather she went to her partner and in a voice trickling with mockery said, evidently we're running a water drive now. She laughed like her remark was a joke, however the tone was horrible. Before Hazel could say another word, a little voice from across the path ended the quietness. Here, you can have my water. Hazel went to see a little kid no more seasoned than 9 holding out a half-full jug of water. Her enormous honest eyes took a gander at Hazel with certifiable consideration. I don't require it, the young lady added. Hazel's heart expanded at the signal. She grinned energetically at the young lady and went after the jug. Thank you, darling, she said tenderly. You're extremely kind. The young lady's folks sitting next to her grinned at Hazel, giving the thumbs up. In the meantime, Karen's jaw fixed, her face flushing somewhat as she understood the developing help Hazel was getting from the travelers. How about we keep the walkway clear? Karen snapped, pushing the drink truck forward. Without one more word, Hazel wound the cap off the jug and took a little taste, the cool water relieving her dry throat. She put the jug cautiously on her folding table, her hands consistent regardless of the profound disturbance she felt. Are you okay, ma'am? The young lady's mother asked, inclining across the passageway. Hazel gestured and grinned, however her voice conveyed a smidgen of bitterness. "I'm fine, thank you, and thank you for raising such a smart young lady." The mother's grin enlarged and she delicately tapped her little girl's hand, pride apparent in her articulation. However, Karen wasn't done. Her dissatisfaction appeared to develop as she saw the little thoughtful gestures Hazel got, and she proceeded with her obligations. Yet her developments were more keen, her tone crueler, and her looks at Hazel more incessant. Maybe she detested the way that Hazel's tranquil nobility and the traveler's support subverted her endeavors to cause Hazel to feel unwanted. The unease was overwhelming, yet Hazel didn't allow it to crush her. She sat spirited in her seat, glancing through the window again, helping herself to remember the delight looking for her at her objective. She had confronted misfortune previously, and she realized that benevolence and tolerance frequently won out in the end. Little did Karen know her conduct was not slipping through the cracks. A few travelers were discreetly recording her activities, their telephones unobtrusively catching recordings of her sharp remarks and cavalier mentality. They didn't have the foggiest idea Hazel's story, yet they could see that this was something other than terrible help. It was focused on and unjustifiable treatment. Karen, anyway, stayed neglectful too, centered around her developing dissatisfaction to understand that her activities were sowing the seeds of a backfire she could never see coming. Karen's irritation with Miss Hazel appeared to develop as time passes. Hazel's quiet disposition, the steady murmurs from different travelers, and the little kid's good thought of offering her water, every last bit of it had plainly shaken Karen. She was unable to stand that her endeavors to embarrass Hazel were being met with calm obstruction and more regrettable empathy from others. Karen's disappointment bubbled over as she remained close to the front of the lodge, glaring down the passageway at Hazel, who was sitting unobtrusively and glancing through the window. She concluded that she'd had sufficient. Karen's swelled feeling of power persuaded her that she expected to make a move, activity that would in her see any problems, reassert her control and free the trip of what she considered an issue traveler. Karen strode down the path, her heels clicking forcefully against the floor, and halted unexpectedly before Hazel's line. "Ma'am," she said uproariously, her voice slicing through the lodge clamor, "I want you to accompany me." "No." Hazel turned her head, frightened by Karen's unexpected tone. "Is there an issue?" she asked smoothly, her voice delicate yet consistent. Karen folded her arms, her lips squeezed into a tight line. "You've been causing an unsettling influence since you loaded onto this flight," she pronounced. "I've allowed you various opportunities to adhere to guidelines, yet you would not consent." A mumble spread through the lodge as travelers traded confused, what's more, concerned looks. They had seen Hazel's well-mannered attitude and Karen's rehashed aggression, and it was clear to the greater part of them that this allegation was outlandish. "I don't comprehend," Hazel said, her forehead wrinkling. "I haven't caused any aggravation. I've basically been sitting here staying out of other people's affairs." Karen's tone developed more keen, like raising her voice would make her case more authentic. "You've been squeezing the call button, superfluously disturbing my obligations, and presently you're declining to collaborate. This is an inadmissible way of behaving." Hazel opened her mouth to answer, yet before she could say a word Karen pivoted suddenly and strolled energetically to the front of the plane. She got the radio and talked straightforwardly to the pilot. "Skipper, we have a traveler in 2A who is being problematic and rebellious. I'm mentioning quick evacuation before departure." Pants undulated through the lodge. A few travelers started to voice their complaints. "She hasn't done whatever wrong," said the moderately aged man sitting behind Hazel. "This is crazy," murmured another traveler, shaking her head in mistrust. A young lady in business clothing took out her telephone and started recording the not entirely settled to catch what she accepted was a demonstration of foul play. However, Karen overlooked them all. Minutes after the fact, two air terminal security officials loaded onto the plane, their demeanor serious. Karen motioned toward Hazel with a fulfilled sneer. "That is her," she said. Hazel's heart sank, yet she would not allow her feelings to show. With calm nobility she went after her little purse and stood up. The security officials moved toward her, their voices delicate however firm. "Ma'am, we want you to accompany us," one of them said. Hazel gestured, her jawline held high. "Obviously," she answered delicately. She went to the travelers around her and offered a little conciliatory grin. "I'm upset for any burden," she said. However, she knew in her heart that she misunderstood, didn't do anything as she made as she would prefer down the walkway. Accompanied by the officials, a few travelers voiced their help. "This isn't correct," one man yelled. "She didn't do anything," added another. The little kid who had given Hazel her water pulled on. Her mom sleeve, her eyes wide with concern. Mother, for what reason are they taking her away? She's pleasant. The mother inclined down and murmured, at times individuals are treated unreasonably, darling, yet we'll ensure this doesn't be ignored. Hazel strolled with beauty and balance, her head held high even as Karen sneered from the front of the plane, plainly satisfied with herself. For Karen this was a triumph, a method for reasserting her control. Furthermore, freed the trip of somebody she had chosen who didn't have a place. Yet what Karen didn't understand was that her activities were being firmly noticed. A few travelers had recorded the whole occurrence on their telephones, catching her antagonism, Hazel's serenity, and the bad form of the circumstances. Hazel ventured off the plane. The air terminal security officials accompanied her to a peaceful seating region in the terminal. One of them, detecting her trouble, said, "Ma'am, we're simply following convention. On the off chance that you'd like to record a grievance, we can assist you with it." That Hazel gestured still created. "Much obliged to you," she said. Just in the meantime, back on the plane, Karen started planning for departure. Absent to the situation unfolding around her, she didn't realize that the travelers who had seen her conduct were at that point wanting to report her activities, and she unquestionably didn't realize that Ms. Hazel was definitely more than the unobtrusively dressed old lady. She gave off an impression of being Karen's self-satisfied fulfillment wouldn't keep going long. In simply a question of minutes each, everything was going to change, and not in the manner she anticipated. As Miss Hazel sat discreetly in the air terminal, her contemplations were a blend of bitterness and reflection. She had never been one to request regard or cause a situation, rather she had consistently had confidence in the force of pride, persistence, and effortlessness. In any case, even she was unable to deny the sting of what had simply occurred. With a delicate murmur she ventured into her little satchel and taking out her mobile phone she delayed the slightest bit gazing at the screen. For years she had decided to carry on with an unassuming life regardless of her child's prosperity. She cherished him profoundly and was pleased with all he had accomplished, yet she had never needed to utilize his name to acquire favor or extraordinary treatment. Yet this was different. Hazel dialed a number, her fingers consistent in any case. Conscious, the telephone rang 2 times before a profound recognizable voice replied. Mother said, "Mr. Jennings, the president of the aircraft. Is all that all right? Shouldn't you be on the trip at this point?" Hazel's voice was quiet yet touched with exhaustion. "No, child," she answered delicately. "I've been eliminated from the trip." There was an interruption on the opposite stopping point, followed by a sharp admission of breath. What eliminated? Why? Hazel delayed, not having any desire to disturb him. However, she realized he expected to hear reality. "The airline steward. She could have done without the manner in which I looked. I guess," she guaranteed, "I was causing an unsettling influence. It was embarrassing. However, I didn't contend. I only left for a second." There was quiet. Then Mr. Jennings' voice returned, low and controlled yet overflowing with wrath. "Mother, are you serious? This occurred on one of my planes." "Yes," Hazel answered. "I didn't need to create problems, yet I figured you ought to realize this is greater than just me. That lady Karen, I accept her name, shouldn't treat anybody this way." Karen, Jennings rehashed, his voice sharp. "I'll handle this quickly." "Mother, are you all right? Where are you?" "Right currently I'm fine," Hazel guaranteed him. "I'm in the terminal holding up close to door 12. I'll get back to you," Jennings said, his tone last. As Hazel hung up, she couldn't resist the opportunity to feel a blend of feelings. She loathed the prospect of her child being vexed, yet she additionally realized that this second could start change for her as well as for other people who could confront comparative abuse. In the meantime, in the aircraft's control room, disorder ejected as Mr. Jennings' call got through. The senior tasks supervisor, a non-babble lady named Linda, got the telephone. "Mr. Jennings, great night." Linda welcomed him, her voice proficient. "Not all that great, Linda," Jennings snapped. "I just got an disturbing report. My mom, Miss Hazel Jennings, was abused and effectively eliminated from one of our flights. I want a clarification presently." Linda's face went pale. Your mom?" she stammered, previously composing irately on her console to pull up the flight records. "Sir, I didn't know about." "Course you weren't," Jennings hindered. "She intentionally keeps her association with me hidden to stay away from special treatment. However, that doesn't pardon what happened. I need to realize who was capable." Information disclosed and why this wasn't raised quickly. "Yes, sir." Linda said, her voice shudder. Inside minutes she had the flight logs and team subtleties on her screen. It appears to be the lead airline steward on that flight is Karen Mallister. She detailed your mom as being problematic and mentioned her evacuation before departure troublesome. Jennings snarled, any individual who realizes my mom knows she's something contrary to problematic. What else? Linda wavered. A few travelers documented grumblings against Karen during boarding and, surprisingly, recorded recordings of her conduct time. Pulling the recording presently. However, early reports recommend Miss Hazel was dealt with unreasonably, unjustifiably. Doesn't actually start to cover it, Jennings said, his voice icy. Send me all that I need, those recordings. The traveler protests and Karen's whole workforce document in front of me right away and let the ground team know. I'm headed to the air terminal. Have security keep Karen when the flight lands. I need to buy a dresser. Indeed, sir, Linda answered, previously planning with her group. As Jennings finished the call he took a full breath too. Consistent his nerves, his mom's voice reverberated to him, quiet, estimated and loaded with effortlessness. Regardless of the embarrassment she had persevered through, he realized she didn't need retribution yet. This wasn't just about her any longer. This was tied in with guaranteeing that no other person could at any point experience such conspicuous segregation on one of his flights. He got his telephone again, this opportunity to call his legitimate group. I need a full survey of our representative direct approaches, he yapped, and I need proposals for guaranteed transforms. We're setting a model beginning today. Back at the air terminal, Hazel sat discreetly, her hands collapsed in her lap. A couple of travelers who had seen the occurrence moved toward her, contribution expressions of help. I'm so upset for what happened, one young lady said. I've previously sent the video I took to the aircraft. They need to realize this isn't alright. Hazel grinned energetically. Much obliged. Dear, generosity like yours gives me trust. Little did Hazel realize her child was previously setting an arrangement into movement, one that wouldn't just address the foul play she had confronted, yet in addition shake the aircraft to its center. Karen's sneer, her pretentious mentality and her maltreatment of power would before long catch up with her in manner she would never have envisioned. And for Hazel this was only the start of an excursion that would reclassify everything as the extravagance. Flight ready for departure. Karen was at that point lolling in her self-pronounced triumph. She swaggered down the walkway, making a demonstration of reviewing travelers and guaranteeing everything was all together. Her pompous grin was steady, as though she had just dispensed with the issue that was Miss Hazel, yet her fulfillment was fleeting. Only minutes before the plane was booked to leave, Karen's name was brought over the radio. Miss Karen Mallister, kindly report to the front of the lodge promptly. Karen grimaced, confounded yet sure. She strolled energetically toward the front of the plane where two formally dressed security officials hung tight for her. One of them signaled toward the entryway. Driving back to the terminal, Mallister, one of the officials said harshly, we really want you to step off the plane with us. What? Why? Karen requested, her tone sharp and guarded. She looked at the pilot, who stayed away from eye-to-eye connection, and afterward at the other airline stewards, who traded apprehensive looks yet said nothing. This isn't easy to refute, the official said kindly. Accompanied us promptly. Karen heaved yet consented, mumbling softly about how ludicrous this was as she ventured off the plane. She saw a gathering sitting tight for her and the terminal, a couple of individuals from the carrier's legitimate group, the activities chief, and remaining in the middle transmitting authority was Mr. Jennings himself. Karen's certainty floundered briefly as she remembered him. However, she immediately recuperated. She had no clue about why the president of the aircraft was there, yet in her psyche she had done nothing out of sorts. Mr. Jennings, she started, her voice bound with faked graciousness, I don't know what's happening. Be that as it may, I have a trip to oversee. Jennings lifted a hand, hushing her right away. His appearance was cold, his eyes sharp with outrage. Miss Mallister, he said, his voice low and controlled, do you know who the traveler was that you eliminated from this flight? Karen squinted, befuddled. Well, she was causing an aggravation. She was being troublesome, declining to adhere to directions. Jennings cut her off again, his tone frigid. That aggravation, as you call it, was my mom. Karen's face depleted of variety. Mother, she stammered, her voice scarcely discernible. Yes, Ms. Hazel Jennings, the lady you embarrassed, abused and dishonestly blamed for being uncontrollable. Jennings said, his words adequately sharp to slice, and I'm here to guarantee that you face the outcomes of your activities. Karen's certainty disintegrated totally. She opened her mouth to dissent, however Jennings didn't give her the opportunity. Do you think I depend exclusively for my mom? He proceeded with, no. Karen, I've assessed security film from the boarding entryway, paid attention to traveler declarations, and watched numerous recordings recorded by those on board. Each piece of proof affirms that your way of behaving was amateurish as well as prejudicial. Also awful. Karen's hands shuddered as she attempted to guard herself. I was simply following conventions, she said pitifully. She was being troublesome, and I thought. Jennings ventured nearer, his glare relentless. You thought wrong. You singled her out in light of her appearance, would not help her, embarrassed her openly, and afterward raised the circumstance to have her eliminated. That is not convention, that is bias. Karen's eyes dashed around the terminal looking for a partner, however she found none. The legitimate group was quiet. The activities supervisor looked nauseated, and the security officials stood firm, sitting tight. For Jennings' requests I have zero capacity to bear conduct like yours, Jennings said solidly. You have humiliated this carrier as well as discolored its standing and actually hurt an honest lady. As of this second you are terminated. You are to surrender your ID, identification, uniform, and any aircraft property promptly. Karen's mouth fell open and she gazed at him in dismay. Terminated? Yet I've been with this aircraft for quite a long time. You mightn't only I at any point can. Jennings intruded on his voice like steel, and I will. Your long periods of administration don't pardon this shameful conduct. You have no spot here. Karen's fights became hysterical. However, sir, please, I didn't intend to. Jennings held up a hand again, quieting her. This discussion is over, he said. Security escort her out of the terminal. Ensure she doesn't step aerobics on another of our planes. The officials pushed ahead, one of them holding out a clipboard for Karen to sign. You'll have to recognize your end, he said abruptly. Karen's hand shook as she marked the structure, tears of outrage and embarrassment gushing down her face. She gave over her ID, identification. What's more, uniform coat prior to being accompanied out of the terminal, her head hanging low as Miss Hazel sat unobtrusively in the lavish celebrity relax her child had sorted out for her. The heaviness of the day's occasions pushed on her heart while she tasted her tea. Her psyche floated back in time, maneuvering her into a progression of recollections, some difficult, others mixed. Hazel had been brought into the world in the profound South during a time when isolation was the rule that everyone must follow. As a little kid she strikingly recollected the white zone filter signs that banished her and her family from entering specific foundations. She reviewed how her mother would hold her hand firmly as they strolled past eateries they would never eat in, or school she was prohibited to go to. One memory specifically stood apart. She was only 9 years old, remaining in line at a corner store with her dad. She had set aside her pennies for quite a long time to purchase a little journal for her school examples. When it was their turn, the business person, a rough, weighty-set man, grabbed the journal from her hand and said, "We don't offer to your caring." Hazel's dad, a common, stately man, smoothly grasped her hand and drove her out of the store without a word. However, Hazel saw the tears welling in his eyes. That second had remained with her, forming her assurance to transcend the bias and unfairness that appeared to be certain. As Hazel became older, the challenges just strengthened. She wedded youthful, and her significant other Henry was a sort man who shared her fantasies of a superior future for their family. Together they worked enthusiastically, he as an industrial facility worker and she as a maid for well-off families. Hazel got through the embarrassment of being treated as imperceptible, or more terrible, as somebody undeserving of essential regard. One day while working for an especially brutal business, Hazel heard a discussion that struck her profoundly. The lady of the house, while facilitating a social occasion of companions, had said individuals like her needn't bother with schooling or desire their implied to serve, and that is all. Hazel hadn't let out the slightest peep, yet in her heart she made a guarantee to herself: my youngsters will never hear words like these. They won't have open doors. One never did. I will ensure that commitment became Hazel's life's main goal. She worked twofold moves now and then, doing without dinners to set aside cash for her youngsters' schooling. She urged them to think ambitiously, reminding them each day that their worth was not characterized by how others saw them, yet by their own work and honesty. Her child Michael Jennings had been a brilliant, aggressive kid from the outset. Hazel actually recollected the day he got back home with a journal brimming with plane portrays and pronounced "Mom, I will construct planes one day." Hazel had grinned and said, "Then you better buckle down, child. Dreaming is free, however achievement includes some major disadvantages, and buckle down he did." Michael succeeded in school, acquiring grants that took him to places Hazel had just known about and stories he concentrated on: aeronautical designing and business, at last ascending through the positions of the flight business to turn into the president of one of the country's biggest aircrafts. Michael always remembered where he came from, and he credited constantly his mom for his prosperity. At each significant achievement he would agree that this is a result of her. "My mom is the explanation I'm here today." However, Hazel's process wasn't without catastrophe. Her significant other Henry died when Michael was simply a young person, passing on Hazel to bring up their kids on her own. Those years were the hardest of her life. She took on more work, at times cleaning 3 houses in a solitary day just to earn barely enough to get by, yet she never let her youngsters see her despondency. Rather, she filled their home with adoration, chuckling, and trust. She read to them consistently, imparting in them the upsides of consideration, steadiness, and confidence. Sitting in the parlor, Hazel couldn't resist the opportunity to ponder how far she and her family had come. Regardless of the outrage she had gotten through, she had never permitted sharpness to flourish in her heart. She had consistently put stock in the force of effortlessness and the significance of treating others with generosity, regardless of how she was treated in kind. Yet the present episode with Karen had returned injuries from a long time ago. Briefly, she felt like that young lady in the corner shop again, concealed, undesirable, disgraceful, yet as she stayed there, encompassed by the extravagance and solace her child had sorted out for her, Hazel helped herself to remember something she had told Michael quite a while in the past: poise isn't about how others treat you, it's about how you hold yourself, regardless of what. She fixed her stance and took one more taste of her tea. The aggravation of the past would constantly be a piece of her story, yet it wasn't the finish of it. She had confronted difficulty previously, and she had beaten it each time as she trusted that Michael will show up. Hazel felt a recharged feeling of direction. Maybe this episode TNT wasn't simply one more demonstration of bias, it was a chance to start change, to remind the world that poise and regard ought to be general. Much to her dismay, her child was at that point wanting to transform this excruciating second into a defining moment for Hazel as well as for the whole carrier industry. As Jennings watched her leave, his indignation started to cool, supplanted by a feeling of assurance. He went to Linda, the activities administrator, ensure each traveler who saw this gets formal expression of remorse from the aircraft. He said, "Furthermore, I believe that a group should survey and update our representative preparation program quickly. Nobody ought to at any point need to go through what my mom did at any point in the future." "Yes, sir," Linda answered, previously taking notes. "And where is my mom now?" Jennings asked, his voice mellowing. "She's still in the terminal," Linda said. "Entryway 12. Jennings gestured. "I'll go to her." As he strolled through the terminal, his contemplations were engaged. Done one thing, making things right for his mom as well as for each traveler who should have been treated with deference and pride, paying little heed to what their identity was or where they came from. He had no clue about that. The expanding influence of his activities was going to change the fate of the aircraft and his mom's life in manners nobody might have anticipated. As Miss Hazel sat discreetly in the extravagant celebrity relax her child had sorted out for her, the heaviness of the day's occasions pushed on her heart while she tasted her tea. Her psyche floated back in time, maneuvering her into a progression of recollections, some difficult, others mixed. Hazel had been brought into the world in the profound South during a period when isolation was the rule that everyone must follow. As a little kid, she strikingly recalled the white just signs that banished her and her family from entering specific foundations. She reviewed how her mom would hold her hand firmly as they strolled past eateries they would never eat in, or school she was prohibited to go to. One memory specifically stood apart. She was only 9 years of age, remaining in line at a corner shop with her dad. She had set aside her pennies for a really long time to purchase a little notepad for her school examples. When it was their turn, the business person, a blunt, heavy-set man, grabbed the notepad from her hand and said, "We don't offer to your caring Hazel's dad to come. What's more, stately man smoothly grasped her hand and drove her out of the store without a word, yet Hazel saw the tears welling in his eyes that second had remained with her, forming her assurance to transcend the bias and treachery that appeared to be unpreventable. As Hazel became older, the challenges just heightened. She wedded youthful, and her significant other Henry was a sort man who shared her fantasies of a superior future for their family. Together they worked eagerly, he as a production line worker and she as a servant for well-off families. Hazel got through the embarrassment of being treated as undetectable, or more terrible, as somebody undeserving of fundamental regard. One day while working for an especially unforgiving boss, Hazel heard a discussion that struck her profoundly. The lady of the house, while facilitating a social occasion of companions, had said individuals like her needn't bother with instruction or desire their implied to serve, and that is all Hazel had, and to let out the slightest peep. Yet in her heart she made a guarantee to herself: my youngsters will never hear words like these, they won't have open doors one ever did. I will ensure that. Commitment became Hazel's life's central goal. She worked twofold moves, at times doing without dinners to set aside cash for her youngsters' schooling. She urged them to think ambitiously, reminding them each day that their worth was not characterized by how others saw them, yet independently and respectability. Her child Michael Jennings had been a splendid aggressive kid from the outset. Hazel actually recollected the day he got back home with a journal loaded with plain outlines and proclaimed, "Mother, I will assemble planes one day." Hazel had grinned and said, "Then you better buckle down, child. Dreaming is free, yet achievement includes some significant pitfalls." And buckle down he did. Michael succeeded in school, procuring grants that took him to places Hazel had just known about and stories. He concentrated on aeronautical designing and business in the long run, ascending through the positions of the flight business to turn into the chief of one of the country's biggest carriers. Michael always remembered where he came from, and he credited constantly his mom for his prosperity at each significant achievement. He would agree that this is a result of her. "My mom is the explanation I'm here today." Yet Hazel's process wasn't without deplorability. Her significant other Henry died when Michael was simply a young person, passing on Hazel to bring up their kids on her own. Those years were the hardest of her life. She took on more work, at times cleaning 3 houses in a solitary day just to get by, yet she never let her youngsters see her depression. Rather, she filled their home with affection, chuckling and trust. She read to them consistently, imparting in them the upsides of graciousness, tirelessness and confidence. Sitting in the parlor, Hazel really wanted to ponder how far she and her family had come. In spite of the outrage she had persevered through, she had never permitted harshness to flourish in her heart. She had consistently had faith in the force of beauty and the significance of treating others with benevolence regardless of how she was treated in kind. Yet the present episode with Karen had resumed injuries from a long time ago. Briefly she felt like that young lady in the corner store again, concealed, undesirable, dishonorable. Yet as she stayed there, encompassed by the extravagance and solace her child had set up for her, Hazel helped herself to remember something she had told Michael quite a while in the past: pride isn't about how others treat you, it's about how you conduct yourself regardless of what. She fixed her stance and took one more taste of her tea. The aggravation of the past would continuously be a piece of her story, however it wasn't the finish of it. She had confronted difficulty previously and she had defeated it each time as she trusted that Michael will show up. Hazel felt a recharged feeling of direction. Maybe this occurrence wasn't simply one more demonstration of bias, it was a chance to start changed, to remind the world that nobility and regard ought to be widespread. Much to her dismay, her child was at that point intending to transform the difficult second into a defining moment for Hazel as well as for the whole carrier industry. As the situation of the day transpired, Mr. Jennings understood that his mom's abuse wasn't simply an individual insult, it was a impression of a law not set in stone. To make things right, he got a move on. First thing he did was guarantee that Hazel would be on the following accessible flight, however this time in 5-star, where she would be treated with extreme attention to detail and regard. He by and by called the aircraft staff to ensure Hazel was invited energetically from the entryway to her seat and that no stone was left unturned, and guaranteeing her solace in the meantime, Jennings drafted an ardent expression of remorse for Hazel as well as for every one of the travelers who had seen the occurrence. He knew that a foul play like this requested a public reaction. Sometime thereafter the carrier put out a conventional announcement: "We profoundly lament and apologize for the the unsatisfactory treatment of one of our esteemed travelers, Miss Hazel Jennings, by an individual from our staff. Such way of behaving doesn't mirror the upsides of our aircraft. We are focused on tending to this episode with the reality it merits, guaranteeing that no traveler is at any point treated with such insolence again. Taking effect right now, the staff part dependable has been fired, and we are executing compulsory preparation for all workers to advance inclusivity, regard, and impressive skill to all travelers on Flight 307. We offer a full discount and a free future trip as remuneration for seeing this upsetting episode. To Ms. Hazel Jennings, we brought in our most profound conciliatory sentiments. Furthermore, guarantee that this will act as a defining moment for our organization. The assertion, endorsed by Mr. Jennings himself, was posted on the aircraft site and shared across its virtual entertainment channels. Inside the space of minutes, it started to build up forward movement. However, the rail blast came when travelers on the flight began sharing their own records of what had occurred. Video accepted showed Hazel's quiet poise as she was accompanied off the plane stood out from Karen's priggish and deigning disposition. One traveler, a movement blogger with a huge following, posted a video named "The Most Grounded Lady I've at Any Point Met," commending Hazel's effortlessness under tension. This lady was treated so unreasonably, the blogger said. However, she held her head high and never let them break her. She's a genuine motivation. The video became famous online, gathering a huge number of perspectives within the space of hours. Remarks poured in from around the world. How might anybody at some point deal with such a sweet culture that this is precisely exact things the matter with this present reality? Individuals judging others by appearances. Miss Hazel is a sovereign. I truly want to believe that she's doing. Affirm news outlets immediately got the story titles like "Aircraft Co's Mom Embarrassed in Stunning Occurrence" and "Effortlessness Enduring an Onslaught. Old Lady's Balance Disgraces Prejudicial Airline Steward" started flowing on the web and on television. While Hazel held up in the celebrity relax, uninformed about the developing media storm, Mr. Jennings was immersed with calls from writers and activists. Some requested responsibility while others advertised support for his conclusive activity against Karen. Hazel's story turned into an energizing sob for better treatment of travelers, especially the people who may be ignored or underrated. Backing bunches commended her as an image of calm strength and flexibility. In the meantime, Hazel herself stayed humble. She didn't request any of this consideration. She basically needed to get to her incredible grandkid. At the point when her child joined her in the parlor, he found her tranquilly weaving as though the same old thing had happened. "Michael," she said, with a delicate grin as he moved toward, "you didn't need to do this, you know." "Yes, I did, Mother," he expressed, sitting close to her. "What befell you wasn't correct, and it's my obligation to ensure it doesn't reoccur to you or any other person." Hazel sighed. "You've generally had such a huge heart, child, yet recall that we have zero control over how others treat us. We can control how we answer." Her words as consistently inspired an emotional response from him. "You answered with more effortlessness than I naturally suspect I might have," he conceded. "Yet this isn't just about how you took care of it, it's about ensuring no other person has to." As the news spread, an ever-increasing number of individuals started sharing their own accounts of being abused or were judged unreasonably during movement. Hazel's story lighted a worldwide discussion about regard, respect, and the significance of treating everybody similarly. In the days that followed, the airline stock at first took a plunge, mirroring the public shock over the occurrence. However, as Mr. Jennings' quick activities and general acknowledgement earned respect, the organization started to recuperate. Clients communicated recharged certainty in the carrier, lauding the chief for making a prompt and definitive move. "Not numerous pioneers would have done what he did," one client remarked. Web-based, he supported what was correct even against his own staff. That is trustworthiness. For Hazel, the flood of help was overpowering. Outsiders sent her letters, roses, and gifts expressing gratitude toward her for her calm valiance. What's more, wishing her well. She didn't see herself as a legend, simply a grandma who needed to see her family, yet to the world she was an image of versatility and beauty. When Hazel boarded her new top-of-the-line flight, she was met with an altogether unique air. The group welcomed her energetically, offering her each solace possible. Travelers perceived her from the news and welcomed her with deference and profound respect. As she settled into her extravagant seat, an airline steward moved toward her with a plate of rewards. "Ms. Hazel, it's a distinction to have you ready. In the event that there's anything you want, kindly go ahead." And Hazel grinned benevolent and answered, "Thank you, dear, I'm only glad to be on my way." Much to her dismay, this was just the start of the progressions her experience would rouse as Hazel sat on her top-notch seat, easily tasting her tea. What's more, watching the mists float past her window, she really wanted to ponder the occasions of the day, the consideration, the conciliatory sentiment, the staggering flood of help. Everything felt dreamlike, however profound. Down Hazel realized that this wasn't just about her, this was tied in with something greater, the abuse she had persevered because of the airline steward. Karen wasn't simply a disconnected occurrence, it was essential for a lot bigger issue. Fundamental insolence, especially toward individuals who were time and again ignored, judged and excused. And keeping in mind that Hazel was appreciative for the conciliatory sentiment and the consideration, she was unable to shake the inclination that the genuine work had recently started. When her child Michael at last showed up to beware of her, she was prepared. She'd been thinking about it during the whole flight, the wheels to her turning persistently. Hazel wasn't the sort to let things slide or trust that others will fix the world's concerns. She had consumed her time on Earth battling for uniformity, for regard and for pride, and not set in stone to continue to battle for her and for other people who were time and again abused. "Mother, are you okay?" Michael asked as he sat close to her, his anxiety clear in his voice. He could see that Hazel was somewhere down in thought, her eyes zeroed in on him as well as on something a lot greater. Hazel checked out him, her appearance serious. "Michael, I've been thinking," she started, "this isn't simply about me, about everybody's been dealt with like I was, as we don't make any difference." Michael gestured, understanding the heaviness of her words. "I realize, I've heard the accounts, I've seen the news. This is greater than one airline steward. We need to ensure it at absolutely no point ever occurs in the future." Hazel stopped briefly. Social event, precisely what she had in mind. However, words alone aren't sufficient. Activity talks stronger, don't you think? Michael was shocked briefly. "What is it that you mean? I need to lead that change, Michael. I need to be a piece of ensuring that your carrier and each and every other organization treats everybody with regard, regardless of what their identity is or the way that they look. I need to have an effect for us as well as for every individual who's at any point been informed they don't make any difference." Michael's eyes augmented as he handled what his mom was talking about. It wasn't simply the normal reaction he anticipated from her of pardoning and calm strength. This time she was inquiring for something a lot bolder. She wasn't requesting compensation or retribution, she was requesting power. Hazel proceeded with her voice enduring, assuming I will be the face of this change. I need to lead it, not simply observe as a passive spectator. I need to go with choices that guarantee nobody is at any point dealt with like I was today. Briefly Michael sat in staggered quietness. He had consistently known his mom to be solid, yet this was something different. Hazel wasn't simply requesting a symbolic signal, she was requesting a functioning job in changing the carrier, in making a culture of inclusivity and regard. "I believe you should move responsibility for significant portion of the aircraft to me," Hazel said, her tone quiet however unfaltering. "I need to be a piece of this organization, not simply in name, however in real life. In the event that I will assist with fixing things, I really want to grab a chair at the table." Michael could scarcely trust his ears. His mom, the one who had persevered so a lot and never looked for acknowledgement, was presently requesting a strong stake in the very organization he had fabricated. It was a striking solicitation, and at first he didn't have the foggiest idea how to answer. Yet then he contemplated all that Hazel had accomplished for him, all that she had forfeited to offer him the chances he had, and at that time Michael realized this wasn't simply a mother's supplication, this was a development, and on the off chance that anybody could lead it was Hazel. "Hello mother," he said at last, his voice thick with feeling. "In the event that you're certain this is what you need, I'll get it going. I'll move the offers to you." You'll be an essential partner in the organization. You'll have a genuine voice by the way we get things done from here onward. Hazel's eyes illuminated, and interestingly since the episode a grin spread across her face. Much thanks to you, Michael. I know it's a major step, however I need to show up for individuals who need to see change. Who need to see that somebody thinks often about them. The next days were a hurricane. Michael burned through no time in making the important game plans, legitimately moving a huge piece of the carrier's offers to his mom. Hazel's new situation as an essential partner was reported to the board. Furthermore, the choice sent shockwaves through the organization. A few leaders were doubtful. They contemplated whether Hazel, a lady who had gone through the greater part of her time on Earth out of the corporate spotlight, could genuinely explore the intricacies of a worldwide carrier. Yet Michael remained by his choice, consoling them that his mom's exceptional point of view was unequivocally what the organization required. In the media, Hazel's choice to take responsibility for the aircraft was met with blended responses. Some cheered her boldness and prescience, calling her a pioneer in the battle for balance. Furthermore, portrayal others, especially pundits who had upheld Karen's activities, were not exactly excited yet. Hazel couldn't have cared less about the pundits. She had a mission, and presently she possessed the ability to complete it. As Hazel turned into a huge investor in the carrier, she started to utilize her recently discovered leverage to push for genuinely foundational transform. She supported for new preparation programs on inclusivity and social awareness for all workers, from flight participation to pilots to leaders. She required the aircraft to cooperate with local area associations to cultivate variety and offer grants to underrepresented bunches who needed to seek after professions in flight. Hazel wasn't simply sitting down at the table, she was reshaping the actual table. It wasn't some time before Hazel's presence was felt inside the organization as well as all through the whole business. Aircrafts all over the planet started to consider the positive changes that were going on under her authority. Consumer loyalty improved as travelers revealed feeling more regarded, and esteemed representatives, particularly those from minimized networks, felt a feeling of satisfaction in working for an organization that was having an effect. Hazel had stood firm, and presently she was driving the way for others to continue. Soon after the occurrence, Karen's life started to unwind in a manner she would never have anticipated. What she had believed was a minor showdown on a normal flight had immediately gathered momentum into an embarrassment that would everlastingly change her life. The openness of her way of behaving, impolite, unfair, and out horrible, had inspired an emotional response from general society, lighting a firestorm of backfire. The principal sign that things were going south for Karen came when her virtual entertainment accounts were overflowed with irate remarks. Individuals who had heard the story started to voice their shock, internet sharing news stories, recordings, and declarations about her abuse of Miss Hazel. The #equity for Hazel moved for quite a long time, and Karen's name was attached to it in the absolute worst manner. As the story acquired footing, media sources and virtual entertainment stages started to dig further. They found old posts, photographs, and, surprisingly, on the web, remarks from Karen that uncovered her upsetting perspectives on race and social class. These posts, however not straightforwardly related to her activities on the flight, portrayed somebody who held on to biases against individuals who were unique in relation to her. Karen had fabricated her vocation on a clean public picture. However, now the picture was broken. The carrier, once hesitant to make a quick move, was presently under extraordinary strain to reduce most, if not all, connection with Karen and her way of behaving as the substance of the organization. Michael Jennings realized that he needed to act definitively. Hazel's choice to turn into an investor, also, her vocal position on inclusivity, had previously established the vibe there was no space for extremism in this new vision. Yet Karen didn't expect the quick outcomes that followed. Inside the space of days, she was called for a proper gathering with the aircraft's HR office. She was terminated without a second thought. Her agreement ended promptly. Thiene clarified that her activities had disregarded their governing set of principles as well as sold out the qualities they represented. Notwithstanding the seriousness of her excusal, Karen actually appeared to not be able to completely get a handle on The gravity of what she had done, she attempted to guarantee that she had been misconstrued, that her activities had been dramatically overemphasized. She even attempted to paint herself as a casualty, contending that she had been feeling the squeeze from the circumstance and that she was simply attempting to take care of her business. However, her protection bombed. The carrier put out an announcement that made it clear Karen's activities were unsatisfactory and general society repeated their feeling. Truth be told, it wasn't some time before the story took on an unmistakable overflow of energy. Karen was at this point not simply a airline steward who had abused a traveler. She was presently an image of the sort of conduct that society declined to endure. As her end became public information, Karen's expert possibilities dwindled. Propositions for employment, once plentiful in the movement and friendliness industry, vanished. The account encompassing her had become poisonous, and she wound up boycotted from potential businesses. Her name became inseparable from the actual sort of bias that was presently viewed as unsuitable. Managers didn't need to risk employing somebody with such a high-profile embarrassment connected to their name. Karen had to confront the truth that her activities had results a long ways past what she had at first envisioned. The disconnection she encountered was deplorable. Companions and colleagues started to separate themselves, large numbers of them awkward with the manner in which her way of behaving had been uncovered. Karen had constructed her life on keeping a specific picture of herself. However, presently she was living following a notoriety that was hopelessly harmed, trying to rescue what was left of her vocation. Karen connected with a couple proficient contacts, wanting to find an open door in another area. She even thought to be moving to another city, trusting that a new beginning could assist her with revamping her life. However, the stain of her activities waited, following her any place she went. In the meantime, Hazel, now a conspicuous figure in the carrier's administration, had started to assume responsibility for advertising. Hazel's vision for the carrier was clear: a guarantee to variety, consideration, and regard in each feature of the business. Her attendance at the carrier's central command was a steady indication of the change that was currently occurring. However, it wasn't simply Hazel's words that had the effect, it was the moves she initiated to follow completely finish her guarantees. Hazel made it a highlight carry out strategies that would keep any type of segregation from ever happening again inside the aircraft. She presented required preparing programs zeroed in on social responsiveness, oblivious predisposition, and comprehensive correspondence. She pushed for greater variety in recruiting at all levels, from pilots to ground team to chiefs. Yet something other than strategy changes. Hazel's authority style was a strong illustration of what it intended: to treat individuals with nobility and regard. Her presence in the organization was a demonstration of the way that regard for others wasn't just about empty talk, it was about certified change from the top down. As a component of her new job, Hazel likewise willingly volunteered to address the episode with Karen, openly utilizing the stage to additionally support the aircraft's obligation to regard and inclusivity in her most memorable public location. As a feature of the PR crusade, Hazel underlined that everybody, no matter what their race, foundation, or appearance, should be treated with poise and reasonableness. There is no space for slight in this world, Hazel said during a press meeting, and there's absolutely no space for it on our flights. We won't endure conduct that disparages others. We represent balance and we represent regard. Her message resounded profoundly, not just with the media, yet with the public. It wasn't just around one episode on a plane, it was about a whole change in how society moved toward issues of race, class, and nobility. Hazel's voice turned into a signal of progress for the overwhelming majority, and the carrier before long ended up at the front of a development toward inclusivity in the movement business. In the meantime, Karen, left to wrestle with the aftermath, gradually blurred from the public eye. While she had once been important for a strong framework, her inheritance was presently a wake-up call about how rapidly a singular's profession and notoriety could be obliterated by their own biases. In the end, Hazel's choice to make a move had not just steered her own life, however, had helped flash a more extensive social shift.